Welcome to another episode of the Payment Strategy Show. I am Aaron Steinberg, VP of Revenue here at Rainforest. We help software platforms embed payment processing into their core product to grow revenue and improve customer retention. Today, I am fortunate enough to be here with Luke Sophinos. Luke is a Vertical software founder, previous CEO, and investor. Luke, thank you for joining us on the show.
Absolutely. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to get all of your background and experience. And I would love to sort of just kick it off. Maybe you could just tell us about your background. What inspired you to found CourseKey, currently known as Portico?
I have a little bit of, falling into things as I'm sure most people do, but came out to California for school, kind of always an entrepreneur, started a business in high school that was competing with the high school prom. Made my first $10,000 through that. And I think my parents thought I was a drug dealer or something. So I had the entrepreneurial itch, came out to school, really the first time everybody had a smart device in their pocket. And so my big theory was we should enable teachers to leverage those learning tools versus trying to fight against those as distractions. So we built a product, we tried to scale it within the traditional college world, got totally beat up, got good traction at kind of our home university, but couldn't expand it further. And then eventually kind of stumbled into the trade school space and just saw that there wasn't really any competition and a lot of room for product growth. We could do a lot more. They weren't using like the Blackboard or Canvases, the big systems in that space. And so we went module by module and then over a 10-year period built kind of the operating system or the ERP or the business management software, whatever terminology you want to use, of the trade school space. I did the payments thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about in that journey. And then I sold it to private equity last year. Now the company's called Portico and they're going to do great. I'm still an active advisor, but goal is to continue to grow market share there, buy a bunch of other companies that offer complementary products and services.
Awesome. And how did you kind of stumble into the trade school world? Did you just find it underserved? Did you have a thesis there early on? Curious.
We were kind of hitting our heads against the wall trying to sell into four-year colleges. We had gotten great traction at our home university. There was like the hometown kid kind of story, I think, that helped with that. And as we tried to expand outside of that, we just had a really tough time. But there was a trade school executive whose kid went to our home university and had heard about what we were doing and basically said, oh my gosh, we need this. And so one of the core functionality that we built was attendance. That was kind of our initial product, our wedge product, if you will. And attendance in a four-year college is like, no one cares, right? Like some teachers care, some people don't. It's kind of up to you if you want to show up or not. But in the trade school space, it's required. It's less about GPA and it's more about how many hours did you accrue to get a credential or a license, right? The trade school basically came inbound and we chased it down and we just saw that, hey, attendance is required. It's all time-based. They have this huge problem. They don't have big, enterprise systems. They're willing to pay us $180,000 a year for our software versus, we were charging like $10 per student or something that it wasn't working. And so, just decided to not immediately, but over a 6-month period to completely pivot the business in that direction.
That's super cool. I never would have thought of disrupting the homeroom attendance world as a fruitful proposition, but it just goes to show that there's so many things out there that are just set in ways and the pain points are not necessarily obvious to the rest of us.
Yeah. And I think we only did the attendance. So basically the idea was teachers wanted to engage with the students. And so we created more kind of polling type of tooling, but the teachers wanted to ensure that the students were actually there to respond to the polls. So it's like another example of falling into this attendance component where we used location-based tooling to ensure that you were there. And you'll actually see a lot of companies in vertical software, like their wedge products will be time and attendance or clock in, clock out functionality. And it's typically a really good wedge just because it's not rocket science. And if you find a space that's important to them, it's a beautiful place to like build into eventually a full system because you need scheduling and you need all the users, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, makes sense. Get that foot in the door. Looking back, are there any specific decisions or actions you can point to that you think contributed to a successful exit?
Looking backwards, there's probably a few themes that contributed that I try to push people towards. The first one is you talk to companies and they have like values. They have the 5 or 6 things that they exude or have all their employees exude. And I think it doesn't make any sense. So I think there's no way we can actually track and measure 5 or 6 things. And so one of the things that we did early on that I think really works, and I still believe in it fully, is we just said there's 2 things that everybody that works here has to have. The first thing is that they're relentless. They're willing to just do whatever it takes. It's action, action, action. That's the focus. And so we basically ensured everybody we interviewed had that piece. If it's more than 2 things, like, people don't check for it. So that was a really important one. And then the second one is that they had some sort of chip on their shoulder. Like, they needed this career stop to really work. They had more in it than just a paycheck. And there could be 1,000 reasons that they had a chip on their shoulder. Yeah. But I think those 2 things being core tenets of who we hired really contributed to kind of a strong team and a strong focus. Oh, and then it's the other classic stuff. It's just like getting beat up and knowing that that's just what this game is and what it takes, and being able to stand back up and keep going. We had a bunch of near-death experiences and calls to make payroll, like all the things you hear about. But it was just, look, let's figure out a way. There's always a way.
That's awesome. I think the sort of chip on your shoulder approach, as a revenue leader, like, everybody on my team knows what happens if they do really, really well. But like, the approach of, well, what happens if this doesn't work out, and how do we get ahead of that is actually super interesting sort of way to think about your day-to-day job.
Yeah, I just I don't know if you know Todd at Broadlam. He just posted a really good post today. It was about how a bunch of CEOs kind of live in like la la land, and they think, okay, if I just talk about the vision and like where we're going and we'll eventually get there. I think the problem with that is a lot of cultures will mask the painful stuff, and startups are like 99% painful stuff and 1%,
Right.
la la land. And so he was talking about, and I totally agree with it. I think it was a rip from Charlie Munger, but it's like, we have to know where we die or what happens when we die so that we don't ever go there. And so that we know the signs that we're treading towards where we die, which is a little dark, but I think it's helpful it's your comment on the downside. Like, it's helpful to know what that is so we can do everything we can to avoid it.
Yeah, I think that's right, especially with the little deaths, right? And I think that's why, in my point of view, at least, I've worked at a lot of different startups. Why the second time founders are really, really effective, and also why investors who, like you, were previous operators also are able to get ahead of those little tiny deaths. I'm curious, like, has your perspective changed as you've transitioned from operator to sort of investor and advisor, knowing that you have like a little bit now of sort of both sides of the coin there?
I think in the last few years, and I wish I had done this earlier on, but I think I've come to really appreciate kind of playbooks and frameworks in really studying successful companies, but not just looking at them in isolation, but pulling out themes and categories and things that people have done across different industries. And like, I think vertical SaaS is a great example of how you can really study and understand a bunch of these companies in a bunch of different industries and like what's working and what's not. And you can borrow that for success in your own business. And so like, the second I started doing that at Korsky, now Portico, and payments is a good example of this, is like, I started studying and understanding the payments playbook. And I was like, why didn't I do this 3 or 4 years sooner? Because it really supercharged revenue, it supercharged TAM. It was a beautiful story, like going into a sale process, right? Because you could show what we did in a really short amount of time with it and what the upside was. And so I think that's probably a little bit, it was changing as from the operator's seat as well, but I think it's become more and more important in my eyes is really borrowing what's working from other interesting companies and applying that to my own business versus just like living in the trade school software market where like there's no innovation at all. Once I got out of that and kind of looked at a much greater view, it unlocked a lot for us.
I always find it interesting of like that concept of, well, how much advice can I give as an investor based on my other portfolio companies versus the work I've done myself and the work that I've seen being in the sort of trenches day to day. And I think it's just a very different mentality.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a hill I'll die on, and I get a bunch of grief on Twitter for this, but like I honestly don't believe that you should ever be able to invest if you haven't been an operator. And everyone will come back with like, well, look at all these amazing examples of incredible VCs that weren't and I get it. Like, I totally understand there's player coach, you can debate one way or the other, but like as an entrepreneur, I had a really hard time having calls where people were like so pie in the sky and didn't understand what it was like to like make a phone call to make payroll. the level of like insights and advice was 1,000x more supportive and helpful for me from people that had been there. So, take it or leave it. Like there's a bunch of arguments on the other side of the coin, which I understand, but I want to work with people that have gotten beat up and know what it's like.
Totally. Does that change at stage of the business? Because, one could potentially argue like seed, series A, early stages, like you need some people who have really been there and done it and built and grown and scaled versus pre-IPO. Maybe we just need some money at that point. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. I think the fact that it's a debate of should you have to be a former operator or founder to be a VC, it's actually pretty illogical regardless of where you stand, because it's just a huge blanket versus I think you need to make decisions based on all the specific data points you have with where the business is, what's going on, what are the value. Like there's too many dynamics to just solely hone in on that. And like you said, your pre-IPO, someone's giving you a bunch of money at a great valuation. Like who cares, right? So it just depends. It's case by case.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's like, there's so much nuance in particular in vertical SaaS. As someone who's been deep in vertical SaaS for over a decade now, you've worked with a lot of vertical SaaS companies. What do you see that separates the market leaders from the rest? And if you had to predict winners, what factors do you personally focus on there?
Are we defining winners as like kind of $1 billion outcomes or VC-esque unicorn? Like I think that's because I have plenty of friends that have built like incredible companies that are lifestyle that are in super niche places and they'll never raise any money and they print cash all day. So depends on kind of which angle. If we're talking VC, like market share, like the classic Toasts of the world who have won, I think what matters a lot is deep understanding of how the market's kind of structured and set up on day one. Like before you actually go and build a business, like me, I had no idea. I didn't think about any of these things of segmentation and how big this could actually get. And I was fortunate that I chose one that was big enough, but I've seen that mistake a lot of times. I think the first step is just making sure the market can actually receive and birth the size of company that you want to create. I think that's far more important than the initial idea or the ideas, quite frankly. So that would be like the early stage component. And then as it goes on, it's typically running the classic like VSaaS playbook, which I really believe works. And I've seen it work across all these different companies, which is you're starting with a wedge product. That wedge product is really easy to implement. People love it. It creates a bunch of excitement and value for that space. It gets people to know you really quickly. It's turnkey. It's not hard to implement. And then from that point, you're expanding into, a suite of products, right? So now you're in all these businesses. You understand what else sucks, what else you need to add, and you do that. And then eventually you're getting more into like the operating system or ERP over time. So I think following that playbook has proven time and time again to work. I mean, it's a lot easier to say it than to do it. It's pretty hard to do it. Right. It took us like 11 years, but I think all the winners have followed something similar to that particular playbook. I think that playbook's changing, by the way, with vertical AI, which we can talk about if you want, but that's a common theme. And then it's just the founder, the tenacity of the founder and their ability to recruit, their ability to like be maniacal about this particular industry. It's not about just one problem. It's more about being really passionate about this industry. Like Alir at Slice exudes this. The guy posts, pizza reviews all day. Like he's Dave Portnoy. I love it. But he like really cares about independent pizzerias. He like grew up in one. And so it's super important to him that he doesn't see like Domino's and Pizza Hut run all these shops out of business. And that's unique. And that drives him to do what he's done.
Yeah, that's like the product leaders at Uber that drive Ubers also on the weekends. Yep. Awesome to see. And I think you're absolutely right. Like winning is not the same definition by everybody, and it's impossible to go on LinkedIn and not see a big comment fight on bootstrapping versus raising and those stories of let me tell you the people that look successful on paper and actually made $0 on a $200 million exit. There's all that as well. So you're absolutely right, especially in vertical SaaS where it's maybe not a super interesting or sexy category to others, but there's some guy with 3 employees who's making 7 figures every year and supporting his family. And it's a pretty cool win. I definitely agree with you there. And I think I'm going to take you up on your offer to talk about AI here. How do you see vertical software companies really incorporating AI into their products? And which do you think are actually beneficial versus flashy?
There's a mental framework that I'm using for this right now, just because I've seen it all. Like the marketing speak around AI is out of control, where everyone is just saying this AI tool like completely automates like 50 of your employees and everything that they do all day, which is, awesome in theory, but I think we're just over promising a lot. The framework I have is basically you have a kind of a generative AI functionality, which looks just like a chat GPT. And I think can be super valuable depending on the industry. And so if you have an industry that's like highly regulated or data is really sensitive, this is a great product that you can launch, right? That's a product that's not going to like automate a bunch of employees away and there's like crazy ROI associated with it, but it's like the new wedge product to me. Because if you look at a bridge is a beautiful example of this. Harvey is a beautiful example of this. Is like a bridge is a vertical AI for like hospitals. And so what happened is you had all these doctors like going into chat GPT and posting sensitive information and they're freaking out, like they got to act quickly. And so they're able to adopt this product that, by the way, is trained on all the like medical knowledge that they approve versus the open internet, like chat GPT. So here's a product that requires like no integration, which is amazing for anybody who works in software. They know how long that takes. It's like completely viral, just like ChatGPT was, but it's trained on the right stuff. It's like the perfect definition of a wedge product. Like now you're in all these hospitals, which have historically taken 2 to 3 years to sell into, if not more, and you did it like this. Now you can move up the kind of vertical AI chain into things that are actually create employee replacement level automation. So like that's the first bucket is kind of this Gen AI thing. So that's what I think people should think about is like, do they have a use case for that? The second tier that I look at is more of like Copilot. It's not going to replace anybody, but it's going to live within workflows and it's actually going to make that person more productive. So, the GitHub Copilot is a beautiful example of this. Like when we implemented that, it made our engineers like 25% more productive. We looked at it. So we got like an extra quarter out of them every year. So that's a beautiful use case. It's a lot easier to like jump into that from the Gen AI product than it is to start with that. And then the third bucket is like 1099 AI. Like it replaces a big chunk of something that maybe you don't have to pay an external group for or an agency or something for, but it's not going to replace a human yet. And then the fourth bucket, which I see like 1 out of 100 companies that promise this can actually do it, which is it can replace an entire job function.
Yeah.
And so when I look at existing companies looking at this, or I look at new upstarts, that's the playbook. Starting at the employee replacement thing is like building an ERP as your first product. It's
Right.
incredibly difficult and it's probably going to suck. And you're probably going to promise a bunch of people a bunch of things that you can't actually achieve. And that's not true in all cases, by the way, but I think in most it is. But starting here is like, look at a bridge. They're multi-billion-dollar rocket ship in like 24 months. So, and they just had that Gen AI piece. They haven't even gone into these other 4 buckets yet. So that's how I think about it inside of vertical SaaS businesses, like starting in a specific area and kind of working our way up into full employee piece. And what I'm seeing is most companies are starting at the end here because the ROI looks amazing, but they're not realizing the effort that that's going to take. So.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And where do you recommend just like dabbling and getting your feet wet here? Is it just stuff you need to be doing? Let's just try to make that a little bit more efficient. Is it look at everything manual and just try to replace that with AI before you worry about, actually getting additional value? Would love to hear your advice there.
Yeah, we're definitely on the precipice of like a major computing kind of movement or era. And so I think it's really important for leaders to like make sure every employee is AI fluent or at least working towards AI fluency. The Zapier founders put out a piece on this that was really helpful where he actually like talked about each step that he took to make his organization get there. First step is like the red alert, right? Or hit the alarm bell or whatever you want to say. And he kind of progressed through how he got everybody there. And it's only hiring people that have this type of capability. I think if I was still kind of sitting in the CEO seat, I would make a requirement that everybody is like using AI in some sort of fashion in their particular job function. And over time, they're actually showing how that's accelerating across more and more functions. So most people think that it's just like the going into ChatGPT and like asking it how to cook dinner tonight. But the reality is like there's so many more tools that people aren't really utilizing, like Operator and computer use from Claude. When you have your aha moment with AI, and what I mean by aha moment is like there's never any going back from what this is. It's like when you first called an Uber or when you first use self-driving on your Tesla, like whatever it is. You have to make sure every employee gets there as fast as possible. When it happened for me like 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more recent, but I was using Manus and it was building me a spreadsheet and I was talking to it like it was my CFO. Change this thing, change this assumption. I want more debt here, more equity here. And it was spitting out a financial model like it was a VP of finance. It was wild. So anyways, I think getting everybody to their aha moment quickly and making it a requirement that they're leveraging and using it within the org, and that'll naturally evolve within your product.
Yeah. Do you think that's going to change the way we actually build out job requirements for hiring as well? Like obviously you need to be well-versed in AI in the future, but the inverse is maybe those skills that historically you actually needed, you no longer need because you can just have AI do it for you. Do you see that impacting vertical SaaS?
Yeah, I mean, totally. The new grad job market is like a cliff if you've seen any of the data on this. I was trying to help a friend who's a new grad get a job, and I was like introducing him to the CEOs of these companies, and it was so hard because all the stuff that he would be doing has been totally automated. And so, yeah, I think it's going to absolutely change everything. And what I recommended to him is he needs to like show up with a bunch of AI that he's built out tied to their business and show them what he can help do, because the world's changing and it's changing quick.
Yeah. Scary and exciting at the same time. I'm glad I'm not a new grad at the moment. Yeah. You brought up that, one of the things that you maybe wish you knew a little bit earlier, and we hear this all the time in our world, is sort of acceleration of revenue, importance of embedded finance, things along those lines for vertical software businesses. Would love to understand, now that now that you've helped advise so many vertical software businesses, like what advice would you offer to vertical SaaS leaders who want to maybe add their first embedded fintech product and of course do it in a way that like really drives revenue and true enterprise value at the same time?
There's two pieces to this. So like one is you want to own a workflow either pre or post transaction. I think a lot of eSaaS founders like think that they can just slap in payments without owning pre or post. So what I mean by that is like, in our case, we owned the attendance component, which actually happened right pre-transaction. So like you pay for your tuition and then you show up to class. And then you're making a monthly tuition payment. When the payment system was desperate from our system, kids were still able to show up to class and clock in without having paid for that class. And so we own this post-transaction workflow. And eventually we actually owned the pre-transaction workflow where we created like a CRM to go find the students to enroll them. So payments fit like beautifully in between those two. So you want to surround the transaction, wherever the transaction happens, like you need to have a product that supports pre, post, ideally both those things. So I think that's kind of step one. Step two is once you have that, like you need to add payments ASAP. Don't wait. Right. I had like 1,000 excuses of why I hadn't done it yet. And, we need a BI layer because I need to be able to show at an enterprise level, like the payments piece before I can really drive utilization here. And like the reality is those are a bunch of great excuses, but I should have launched payments like 5 years earlier because I would have created so much more enterprise value for the business. Like the reality is you take your market size and you assume, your SaaS market size is a price per user with so many seats. Like the second you add payments, all of a sudden you're getting a piece of the total industry revenue, not just like your little small SaaS universe, which is typically 2-3% of the entire industry that you're servicing. So I think the quick advice is like own a workflow pre or post transaction, ideally both, and then add payments yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. I'm fortunate I get to speak to a lot of different investors and as it relates to vertical software. And these days, there are a lot whose whole thesis is just backed behind, can they grow this into a really large payments business? Or can they grow this into a really large embedded finance solution? And their vertical software that they built initially is essentially just a Trojan horse into becoming a finance business. It's like mass there. And I think that's a matter of when, not if these days.
Yeah, I mean, totally. You look at Toast. If you look at Toast S1, it's like the perfect use case of this. It's like 80 to 90%, I think, of their revenue. And this might be a little outdated, so don't quote me on it. But some significant amount of their revenue, like, comes solely from transaction fees. And that's the case in a ton of businesses. And use sports VSaaS, like there's a zillion examples in camps. There's a million examples of this because the market size is typically so much more significant than in a SaaS motion.
100%. And then whether it's fintech, whether it's AI, whether it's none of the above, curious, like just the overall sort of like trends or challenges that you see in vertical SaaS over the next few years, and how can vertical software businesses make sure to get a step ahead and be prepared for that?
I think what's going to happen, I get asked the question a lot, is AI going to erode vertical SaaS? Because it's really easy to like spin up new tools, and I can just spin up a new tool that looks exactly like my industry's management system, and it has all the features and functionalities, and then I no longer need to pay that company, $100,000 a year or whatever. I think there's a lot of reasons that doesn't happen, but what I do think is going to happen is there's going to be total consolidation into one or two systems per industry. I mean, if you look at industries today, they all have monopolistic attributes, like every single vertical SaaS business, because the winners obtain like enormous amounts of market share, 50, 60, 70% of the verticals they serve. Like you can look at any industry, there's like 2 or 3 people that own the lion's share of it.
Exactly.
So I think what's going to happen, and I think what people need to be cautious of, is it's a beautiful time for upstarts to go upend those monopolies by leveraging AI and doing the kind of this AI playbook that we talked about. If you're not there yet and you're kind of in point solution land, or you're in like a set of software suites, you have to get to the ERP or system of record level immediately. So there's like 2 things that are going to happen, in my opinion. The AI, you're going to be able to leverage AI to wedge into all these companies, create like an AI workforce, and then get in and then build your own ERP layer. And then you're going to win the industry. Or the ERP layer is going to build the AI piece first and win the industry. And everyone who's not doing one of those 2 things, I think, is going to be in a really tough situation. And I'm seeing that across a lot of different industries. And so what I tell people is like, you got to swallow the frog. There's a million reasons not to be the system of record or the management system in your space. Long sales cycles, rip and replace, blah, blah, blah. But like, you got to swallow the frog at some point, whether that's through M&A or whatever it is. But I see that trend across a lot of industries.
Yeah, it's definitely important to note. We here at Rainforest often refer to platforms as, are they full end-to-end solutions, or are they limited solutions, if you will? And those that are the most successful with AI, the most successful with embedded payments, the most successful with all other embedded finance solutions, end up being true end-to-end solutions. These days, it's so easy and inexpensive to just spin up a software platform, especially one that has some sort of Gen AI component to it. How are you going to stand out long-term? How are you going to build a little bit of a moat? And how are you going to win share from the big guys? And I think that sounds like something that you are bullish on as well.
Absolutely. 100%.
Awesome. All right. Last one here for you that I've been thinking about. If you, as in the operator, investor, and advisor, Luke, if you had to give one piece of advice, just one, to SaaS leaders in vertical software, what would it be?
One piece of advice to SaaS leaders?
That's it. You're only allowed one.
Swallow the frog and get to system of record as quickly as possible.
Awesome. Love it. Gonna get a swallow the frog graphic or t-shirt here, I think. Luke, this has been awesome. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm excited that both of us are helping each other out with some vertical conferences coming up. So for those listeners in vertical software, definitely make sure you check out the 2 conferences that Luke as well as Rainforest will be hosting later this year after summer. If you liked the learnings and insights from experts like Luke, hopefully you'll get a whole bunch more at these 2 events. And Luke, anything you want to leave us with before we part ways here today?
No, just appreciate the time. Come check out our conference in Miami in October, their conference in San Francisco in September. And then, share all these learnings on the newsletter every week as well over at my personal website, which I'm sure we'll link.
Absolutely will. It's a wealth of knowledge. I love reading it every week or whenever it comes out. Appreciate your time here, and looking forward to working on some of these other events with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks, Luke. Talk soon.